Hey folks, well welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. Well, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but we will officially have communists elected to Congress next year because the primaries that's been conducted in New York City have essentially elected self-proclaimed communists with the support of the communist mayor Zoran Mamdani. I love that name. It sounds like a sci-fi character, an alien. Well, in fact, he is one. Well, what would you expect? A majority of New York City's population is now foreign-born. They don't share our culture or our values. Frankly, I feel vindicated, and I love telling everyone I told you so. I and others have been screaming the warning for decades now as to how the Democrats have been laying the foundations that would lead to communism coming to America because the Democrat policies such as open borders and DEI were creating the perfect climate. One of those Democrats, Representative Dan Goldman of New York, who created this Frankenstein, has now been devoured by it and lost his primary after serving 5 terms in Congress. But I don't really feel sorry for him. I'm glad he's gone because he had Trump derangement syndrome and was implementing lawfare against the president as well as supporting every policy that opened the door to communists. But here's an example of what's coming to Congress. And frankly, folks, I don't really feel too sorry for any of you who sat on your butts, never wrote a check or attended a meeting for the purposes of preserving your country. You are now in mortal danger and of your making if you are one of those who thought it was sufficient enough just to vote. Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times, in an interview with the New York editorial board, a group of veteran journalists who question local political and civic leaders, and particularly of late Avilia Chevalier, a rabid communist. She said she opposed all deportations, even those of violent criminals. Get that. She's a prison abolitionist, meaning she wants to eliminate prisons. She either couldn't or wouldn't answer repeated questions about whether murderers should be incarcerated. She literally wiped her hands on the American flag and called white women ugly colonizers and wants to eliminate Western civilization. She wants to eradicate border enforcement, police, and the Supreme Court as well as Congress. Yep, this is New York Democrat nominee for the New York congressional seat. She's not only an avowed communist, folks, but wants to see the destruction of the very civilization that raised mankind out of barbarity. Now, there's not much we can do about the collection of reprobates that inhabit New York City who vote these types of people in office, but we can pass federal laws to keep people like Chevalier of the Dominican Republic out of office. Here's the real problem, folks. We've allowed our Constitution to become a suicide pact and allowed foreigners and the enemies of our way of life to use our freedoms against us. But if we're going to be so foolish as to allow that, perhaps we don't deserve our freedoms anyway. What you are looking at is a future of mass murder because in the last 100 years, communism has murdered over 120 million people and enslaved 1 billion. This woman should be denaturalized and shipped offshore to a deserted island as far as I'm concerned. She should not be allowed to run for office. Well, again, after decades of warnings, having seen the dangers we faced from the foundations that were being poured by liberal Democrats, I'm now vindicated as communists will now enter Congress for the first time. That's absolutely amazing and unforgivable. In fact, they've been there, but hidden behind certain names like liberals, leftists, or socialists, and they've been there all along. But now they're out in the open. They just wouldn't admit it, and you wouldn't listen. Yes, Civil War 2.0 is here, and for all the safety that our Second Amendment to our Constitution was to protect us from tyrannical government, that is our guns, they will do us little good as warfare has changed. It is drones and high tech that will do you in, folks, and your only hope over the next 2 years is the ballot box and to abandon the Democrat Party and anyone who supports them. Use your financial muscle against the media and any corporation or non-governmental organization that supports leftist Democrat causes. To further drive my point home, as if there's anything left of the nail that I've been hammering for years, let's take a quick look at New York City. and the communist mayor Zoran Mamdani, who promised to protect Haitians and Syrian migrants after the Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to end temporary protection status for thousands of Haitians and Syrian migrants. Well, the laws are already on the books that if this communist defies our federal immigration laws, he can be indicted, prosecuted, tried, and sent to jail. This is where this transplanted Indian from Uganda belongs and needs to be excised from any platform. If you know what you should know, you would know that Uganda chased Indians out of their country. The higher class Indians from India are the most racist people in the world because India is the only pagan country in the world except for maybe a few small enclaves in Africa. Its higher class Indians in India still practice a racist caste system and look down upon their own kind. Many of them here do the same thing and anywhere else they are. They will charm you and flatter you, but they still think you beneath them, and Uganda got it straight. And just read your history on that. Okay, now let's try this one on for size. Texas Democrat U.S. Senate candidate James Tallarico said many white churches do not reflect the Jesus described in the Gospels and argued that black churches have a deeper and more accurate understanding of what it means to follow Jesus. And to top it all off, he accuses Christianity as being the most violent religion. Yep, another Democrat for you running for U.S. Senate. Now, let me tell you something about this false teacher and fraud, Tallarico, as I have done a stint in seminary myself, and I can spot a closeted demon pretty quickly. First of all, he is no expert as to what black churches preach or teach. This pandering demon is preying on the simple-minded. I've attended black churches, and I have been to Martin Luther King's former church in Atlanta, Georgia, several times. And for the most part, the Jesus of the Bible and the gospel has been slanted with the politics of race and Democrat handouts. As a former chairman in Louisville, Kentucky here, years ago, I remember reaching out to the black community here, and particularly pastors and ministers, and meeting with them and meeting with the community leaders. And they will tell you on Saturday that they support you, but come Sunday, they will preach in violation of the regulations of their exempt status, and to their congregation, vote Democrat. Folks, that's wrong. They are glad to take your money and receive the benefits of the programs you proposed for help, but you will be betrayed in the end. Now, things have changed a bit, and things are changing here in Louisville, and I'm so happy for that. And in fact, what is really great here is that we have the second largest Cuban population outside of Florida. And guess what? They are mostly Republican. And you know why? Because most of them came from Cuba or have relatives in Cuba, and they know what communism is, and they'll have no part of it. Now, back to my point, while the IRS would threaten any white church with losing their tax-exempt status, not so with the black churches. Tallarico is clueless, and I have the facts and the experience to know that this guy is a pathological liar. And as far as Christianity being the most violent religion, that just goes to show you how little this demonic Tallarico knows. The Hindus in India slaughter and persecute Christians daily. The Islamists are the only religion that prescribe beheadings as punishment. And as history shows, in the last 1,400 years, Islamists have murdered millions of Christians around the world, and doing so today. The God of government that Tallarico worships eliminates religion as they are doing in Canada and Europe. Mark my words in talking about Canada. Canada is in a race to either break up as a non-functioning country, which it already is today, or go fully communist. It is already super cozy with China. And it may be a photo finish, folks. We thought we had ended communism with the fall of the Soviet Union, but sadly, that cancer just metastasized, and it was cloaked and hidden in those who were misnomered as liberals or leftists. Now their cloaks are being removed, and we see the danger that we're in. Most conservatives today are struggling to get their wits about them and to gird their loins in such a way as to be prepared for a bloody fight. Many of them can only blame themselves due to their laziness or their lack of involvement. Now, here's another dose of reality. That Indian transplant, Pramila Jayapal from Washington, revealed that the Democrat lawmakers were absolutely discussing expanding the Supreme Court and implementing term limits. You see, folks, if the communist Democrats can't have it their way, they're going to change the rules and pack the courts with people that will not rule on cases according to the law, but according to their political leanings. This Indian transplant is indistinguishable from any Russian communist. Frankly, folks, what's wrong with us? Why haven't we passed laws that say if you are not born in America, you can't serve in federal government? People who have not grown up under American culture nor share our culture do not belong in this government. It is the American culture that has made this country the greatest, fairest, and most charitable and free country in the history of the world. If we allow it to be infected from within by other cultures that have failed through history and through the history of mankind, then we too will fail and become as miserable as the rest of the world. Now, here's one of the worst creatures to exist in, I think, modern American government. And now, this isn't detached from reality, nor is it a shoot from the hip opinion. This is a factual account over the years of this guy lying to a degree that it should be criminal. And who is he? He's Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's the type to smack you in the face and then tell everyone else that you smacked him. He belongs in the stockades as far as I'm concerned. Friday on CNN's The Arena, Raskin claimed that President Donald Trump had sunk the country into the abyss of corruption and authoritarianism. Here again, another treasonous Democrat practicing projection. And he is part of the communist takeover of the Democrat Party and is discussed and is accusing Trump of exactly what he was doing during the Biden administration. Now, they are planning on packing the Supreme Court and destroying the Electoral College, which will then end our republic. Why else do you think they flooded the country with illegals? They want them to vote so that when the presidential election comes around, the only states that have any influence and power are the West Coast and the Northeast Coast states. For their treachery, these folks belong in jail. And if only you knew their plans, and you can, all you have to do is read and research it. It's no big secret, and I'm not giving you any top secrets here. I'm just revealing to you what is obvious or should be obvious and hope that you will wake up. Start paying attention. Okay, now here's what I call the Commie of the day. As reported in Breitbart News, this leftist school board member in St. Paul, Minnesota, Ms. Allen, suggests that Christian cemeteries should be turned into dog parks so that the animals could pee on white corpses. Now, this news is coming out as she faces charges regarding a mob that invaded a church in January during an anti-ICE demonstration. How do lunatics like this get into positions to teach and mentally abuse your children, causing your children to spend their lives in a psychosis? Well, this happens because you let them. You tolerate them. I can tell you that my dogs have more intellect than this subhuman moron. And who is the white imbecile behind her? Well, if he is supporting her, he might as well be digging his own grave. He's a perfect example of how the liberal white mind virus has infected so many whites. These types and those they tolerate, like this school board member, are cancers upon society and will bring conflict and devastation. Our problem today is how so many of us lack the will to do the difficult thing, and that is to remove this tumor. It will take radical surgery, but few whites and conservatives seem to have the fortitude to do so. Now, this really isn't a black and white problem. The greatest racism being practiced today in this country is not based on skin color, but against conservative blacks, which are rising in numbers, thankfully. In fact, some have been greater apologists for conservatism and our Constitution than whites. And my favorite of all is Dr. Thomas Sowell. Do yourself a favor and listen to him. We are in perilous times. While I celebrate our 250th birthday as the greatest country on earth, the enemies have breached our gates and soon to take position in government. Communism is our and the world's enemy. There's no debate about it. There will be no peace with communists. And like my mentor once told me when he asked me, he says, Jack, what's the definition of peace? He says, peace, the definition of peace is when your enemies are dead. Think about that. And who is your enemy? Well, as it's defined, an enemy is a person who is actively opposed or hostile to someone or something, a thing that harms or weakens something else or someone, and contrary to one's own interest. Simply put, it's an existential threat. That is, remove it or be removed. It's a life or death choice. It doesn't get any simpler than that, folks. Your guns will do you no good, and when the enemy is at your door, it's too late. But frankly, folks, if you have allowed it to advance to that stage, then it's a just punishment for you. Now, with the 4th of July holiday just around the corner, I will keep this podcast short, and I'm grateful to have made it to the 250th, and that I'm alive to see it and celebrate it. But even in the midst of all the celebration, I know the dangers we are in, and without radical measures being taken by conservatives, Republicans, and simple, normal, common sense people of goodwill, we are facing the real likelihood within the next 10 years of losing our republic and the freedoms that go along with it. In a recent celebration of my own, we discussed how my viewership is skyrocketing. But what amuses me the most are my friends who were so aghast and concerned about the vile and nasty comments that some make to the truth that I speak. I just smiled and laughed and told them that I find it amusing because it reveals who the real sick people are, and I know why they spew their invective. They are stupid and lack the facts to support their positions. It further supports what I have been saying all along, and particularly in my book by the name of America's Systemic Psychosis, that these people are psychopaths. They are psychotic. So many people in this country are detached from truth and reality, and they become enraged at the slightest provocation because deep down they know they're wrong. They know they don't have the facts, and they know they can't win the argument. Moreover, they know they're the losers of society and will never amount to anything because their sole talent seems to be in destruction. They haven't the intellect to build or make anything. But even as sick as they are, they may very well destroy the greatest society and country in the world. The same mindset did it to Venezuela, Russia, China, North Korea. They will become the victims of their own psychosis, but we need to make sure we don't join them. There is no utopia here on earth, folks, and fantasies such as those the left propose have historically always been a disaster and ends in death. We saw this in Russia, in China, and all the communist and socialist countries around the world. They murdered, again, I've said it many, many times, they murdered over 120 million people in the past 100 years. Only insane people can keep making the same mistake expecting a different result. They are a bitter, resentful, covetous, and envious people who are incapable of doing the hard things in life to make something of themselves and to make life better for others. When I heard some of my friends' remarks about what some of the haters said in relation to my podcast and articles, it brought a smile to my face because it simply confirmed once again everything that I've been telling them, as well as hundreds of thousands of others that I have reached as to who the enemy is. And of course, I just gave you an example of pointing to Chantal Allen, that school board member, who, of no great surprise, is a co-founder of Black Lives Matter Twin Cities, which was a communist-founded group who defrauded thousands of illiterate donors of millions and others in that organization. And what did they end up doing? They bought luxury homes and cars. They have now been totally discredited. But once again, I could have saved a lot of people a lot of money if they had just listened. I told people in advance of what this group was and who the people were and the frauds they've been proven to be. Well, okay, I don't want to run too long here, folks, and that'll do us for this session. And for the reprobates out there, I'm happy to keep your blood pressure up. So keep those cards and letters coming because it definitely energizes the people that I want to enlist in the fight to save our country. So for all the patriots who love this country, I hope you have a marvelous 4th of July. And if you really want to know how good you have it, just listen to all the comments from the foreign guests that we have in this country that are here for the World Cup and how they extol the virtues of this country and find America to be the most marvelous country on the face of the earth. After all, who should know better than those who have been living in the hell that many on the left created for them in their own countries? And they would love to live here. And I'd love, based upon a lot of the comments they've said, I'd love to have them here. So be grateful, celebrate, and get to work eliminating the enemies of this country. Get involved. And until next time, I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.